What's up, Space Pirates? This is your captain, the delightful dread pirate Dr. Disaster, and I wanted to issue this public service message in case there was any lingering confusion on the matter. Star Wars is dead. Kathleen Kennedy killed it. The thing that we see pop up on TV or in the news occasionally is just Star Wars' lingering, zombified corpse. Star Wars showing up in the news these days is bait. It has to be. I think Lucasfilm wants a portion of their fans angry at them because they believe there's like no such thing as bad press. That's the only explanation I can come up with for Lucasfilm's warped view of the world, that irritating their fans is a great way to run the franchise. And when they put out news like this here, that Jon Favreau is going to be directing a Mandalorian and Grogu movie, well, it's kinda like that scene in a monster movie where the monster is trying to trick someone into getting too close to them.
It's a trick. Get an axe.
The fans who still defend this dogshit franchise have been crying their little eyes out about all of us meanies who don't share their favorable view of the franchise, but it doesn't matter. We have empirical data that we can look at which shows us that Star Wars as a brand is a husk of its former self. In this video, we are going to look at the news that the Mandalorian and Grogu film is coming out, along with news that Ahsoka is getting a second season. And we will follow that up with this data that I mentioned, which paints a clear picture of the failure of Star Wars as a brand. The necromancer Kathleen Kennedy has transformed this thing into a walking corpse. So steel your nerves and arm yourself with zombie-slaying implements, because it is time to do battle with this deceased abomination.
Jesus Christ!
Alright, me hearties, don't forget to like this video. It really helps me out when you do that. And also, make sure to follow me on Twitter. My handle there is Dr. Disaster1. I hope to see you on there soon. But now, let's get into it. This article is from IGN. Its headline says, Jon Favreau to direct new Star Wars movie, The Mandalorian and Grogu. A brand new Star Wars movie directed by Jon Favreau is on the way, and it is called The Mandalorian and Grogu. The film is set to go into production later this year, and the team shared a first look image at what we can expect. The news was revealed by StarWars.com, and it was also confirmed that Jon Favreau, Kathleen Kennedy, and Dave Filoni will all be on board to produce the movie. Now, for anyone out there who still thinks that Jon Favreau might be our guy, I feel like this is fairly disqualifying if everything that has happened to the Mandoverse, including the firing of Gina Carano for no damn reason, the way that Grogu and Mando's character arcs from the first 2 seasons of The Mandalorian was ruined in the Book of Boba Fett. In fact, the whole hodgepodge way that Boba Fett was cobbled together, and basically the same for Mando 3, the way that season felt like it was just shambling aimlessly, well, I can only see one of 2 possibilities. Either we were correct and there was a Lucasfilm civil war and Jon Favreau lost. And now he's happy to keep working for people that are actively ruining the franchise we love. Now he's just kissing their boots. Or the other possibility is that we were full of shit about a civil war, and the way that the Mandoverse has come together was Favreau's vision all along, and he was never on the fan side. Either way, Jon Favreau isn't going to save this franchise. Based on what I can see right now, nothing will. There's no silver lining anywhere, other than the fact that we get to laugh at these jackasses as their movies fail miserably. Star Wars will just linger on in mediocrity as anything that once made the story of Star Wars seminal or interesting gets flushed down the toilet. But anyway, let's keep reading. I have loved telling stories set in the rich world that George Lucas created, said Favreau. The prospect of bringing the Mandalorian and his apprentice Grogu to the big screen is extremely exciting. Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni have ushered into Star Wars two new and beloved characters, and this new story is a perfect fit for the big screen, added Kathleen Kennedy, necromancer of Lucasfilm. Furthermore, the Star Wars team shared that the Mandalorian and Grogu will lead Lucasfilm's ongoing feature development slate, including films helmed by Sharmeen Obaid-Chinoy, James Mangold, and Dave Filoni. So by my count, there are now 4 movies slated to come out starting in 2026, unless they've pushed that up. And the movies sound like they're all going to be released over the course of just a couple of years. So this is your friendly reminder that Disney was always full of shit when they used the Star Wars fatigue excuse back in 2018 to describe why fans didn't go to see Solo, a Star Wars story. Back then, we'd had 5 movies released over a 5-year period. This new release schedule looks to be even more jam-packed. Now, they don't think we remember this stuff, but yeah, Star Wars fatigue was BS in the same way that comic book movie fatigue is BS. What we really suffer from is bad movie fatigue. Now, if we skip down just a bit, in this same article they mention the renewal of the Ahsoka show for a second series. Here it says, as if that wasn't enough big news, the press release casually gives us our first confirmation that Ahsoka Season 2 is currently being developed, even though we all had assumed it would be back for more. This is a good point. We all knew Ahsoka was going to get a second season, and that was going to be the subject of my video for today before this announcement came out. A few days ago, Rosario Dawson said she hadn't heard anything about a second season of Ahsoka yet, but to me, that just wasn't news. A lot of people chatted about it, and that's cool, but I always assumed they were doing a second season. Everyone assumed that, but even with that assumption, Star Wars was still dead to me, as it should be for you. We should all recognize that it is just carrying on as an undead version of itself. And now, if you want evidence that Star Wars is falling off, let's start with this. The first bit of evidence that I want to use is Rotten Tomatoes. Originally, The Mandalorian was seen as possibly the saving grace of the franchise. Back in 2019, it reeled a bunch of us back in and made us at least kinda care about Star Wars again. Its first season received a 92% Rotten Tomato audience score, and the second season was about the same at a solid 91%. Both critics and fans loved the show. But then the wheels fell off. The Book of Boba Fett, which was a spin-off of The Mandalorian and is largely viewed as season 2.5 of the series, got a rotten score on Rotten Tomatoes at 53% from the audience. Hell, even the critics weren't that impressed, giving it only 66%. And then, by the time we got another Mandalorian season, it wasn't well received at all by the fans, being viewed as even worse than the Book of Boba, sitting at 51%. Things have not improved in most other corners of the Star Wars universe either. Obi-Wan Kenobi got only a 62%, and Ahsoka's first season only scored a 69%. Andor is the only Star Wars show to receive any audience love since the first 2 seasons of The Mandalorian, coming in at 86%. But that show's viewership numbers were famously bad because Star Wars fans have checked out in such massive numbers. So despite the fact that the show was actually pretty good, I keep hearing Andor is worth a watch, but I just have no interest. People didn't watch it. And apparently I'm not alone. Take a look at this Google Trends chart showing all the Star Wars live action shows. Now, if you're not familiar with Google Trends, it is a service offered by Google which compares search terms with one another. It won't show raw numbers. For example, it won't tell us exactly how many times a search term was entered into Google during a time period, but it will show us how often a term is searched for compared to another term. Google Trends is a great way to measure enthusiasm for a show in lieu of direct numbers from streaming services on a dependable basis. For an example of how this works, look at the first part of the chart here on the left. This blue line represents The Mandalorian, and this first big spike shows how often the show was searched up on Google back in 2019 when the show first came out. This second spike from 2020 shows us how often The Mandalorian was searched up during the second season. As you can see, the first 2 seasons are basically identical, reaching almost identical heights at their peaks. This red line here represents the search term for the Book of Boba Fett, and as you can see, it was a major drop-off from The Mandalorian, which is insane considering that Boba Fett was a massive fan favorite character for decades. But at its peak, the Book of Boba only reached 23% of the peak of The Mandalorian. This yellow line represents the Obi-Wan Kenobi show, and it saw a huge spike in popularity relative to the Book of Boba. But what's interesting is that unlike the other shows, which spiked at the end of their seasons, Obi-Wan's major spike happened at the beginning of the show, reaching 68% of The Mandalorian's peak, but then enthusiasm waned, which suggests that the show's popularity was carried by the fact that it was starring Obi-Wan Kenobi. Just like Boba Fett, we're talking about a character that was insanely popular with the fans. They really wanted to see Ewan McGregor star as Obi-Wan Kenobi again. But upon watching the first few episodes, enthusiasm went away. Andor came after Obi-Wan Kenobi, represented by the green line. Its peak was also at the beginning of the show, reaching only 25% of The Mandalorian's peak, and then it tapered off. As you can see, enthusiasm is just kind of falling off a cliff for Star Wars fans as a whole, as they gradually realize they aren't going to fix what's broken. Lucasfilm is incapable of fixing Star Wars. And then we see the blue line rising again here, representing last year's Mando Season 3. Interest for the show's 3rd season at its peak reached only 36% of the first 2 seasons' interest at their peak. Clearly, the damage has been done. And then take a look at this sad little purple line that you can barely see peeking its head out at the end of this chart. That purple line represents Ahsoka's first season, and it reached only 8% of The Mandalorian's peak in its first 2 seasons. Combine this with the generally awful reception of these shows from audiences on Rotten Tomatoes and the low viewership numbers as reported by Nielsen, and you can see that Star Wars is just meandering, shambling along like a zombie. This is fitting for an entity that only uses the Star Wars brand as a skin suit. Whatever that thing is that people keep paying attention to, it ain't Star Wars, and no amount of announcements of new movies will recapture the enthusiasm that generations of people once had for it. I will say it again, and I'll keep saying it in every video where I discuss Star Wars. The franchise is dead. Star Wars is dead. Kathleen Kennedy transformed it into a soulless zombie. Thanks for watching, me hearties. If you haven't already, your captain is inviting you to subscribe to the channel and become a part of the crew. Life as a space pirate may not be glamorous, but there's always plenty of booty.